It's go time.
Welcome to Quick Kicks here on Third Down Gamble with your hosts, Don Charbin and Heath Graham.
Welcome back, everyone. Big news out of Toronto. The BMO Field there, that's the host field for both the football teams that play there, if you want to call it that, the soccer team being Toronto FC and the football team being the Toronto Argonauts, is getting a bit of a facelift. Now, it's not that the stadium itself is going to look much different other than 4 jumbotrons, if you want to call it that, in the corners, but it's more behind the scenes that the work is really going to be noticeable.
It is. This is in conjunction with the upcoming 2026 Soccer World Cup that is being co-hosted by Canada, the US, and Mexico. Toronto will be hosting some of the games, and the upgrades to the stadium are to get it ready for that major world event. They're looking at $150 million in upgrades right now. As you mentioned, 4 jumbo video boards will be installed. They're also doing a temporary increase in seating capacity to get it up to about 45,000 people, which is a lot bigger than it currently is. That will be some temporary grandstands, but then a general kind of facelift to the building as well. I think that's great news for Toronto FC, great news for the Toronto Argonauts as well. Any improvements to stadiums is a bonus for the league.
It's about 17,000 in temporary seats that are going to be included in this, and I'm not sure as of yet, given the schedule, how many times Toronto will host, but it'll be a key element in the 2026 FIFA World Cup. The turf itself is going to get an uptick, and it's, if you don't know, it's already grass, but it's got a synthetic weave that goes through it to hold it together, and that confines it. And if you've ever seen a Argonauts football game, and I hope you have, you don't see that field get chewed up in the middle like you would on just a straight grass stadium. I'm not sure if they're changing that or if they're just reaffirming it and making it a little bit better.
I believe part of the mandate from FIFA, which is the World Soccer governing body, is that they do like to have natural grass playing surfaces for these major events. I know there was some grumblings when Canada hosted the Women's World Cup a few years ago of the lack of grass turf fields. This weaving of synthetic and natural seems to be some newer technology that holds up really well to the wear and tear and the amount of activity that it gets in these professional sports with the mass of humanity running around for an hour. It is something that helps maintain its integrity. We don't know all of the details on what that will look like, but I would be very surprised if they're going completely 100% natural turf. I'm sure with the infrastructure already there, they will just be upgrading the synthetic and natural mix.
It could be a new type of grass that they've been developing, and then maybe that's what's going to go in. Maybe it has a tighter root weave down below. That makes it a little bit tougher. It's hard to know exactly how this is all going to play out. There's not a lot of detail yet other than they are going to be doing it. I'm curious, though, with Vancouver. They are another host city in this process in 2026. BC Place Stadium, I don't think you can put grass in there. Even though there's a hole in the roof, you certainly get enough water. They'd have to probably figure out a containment field like they do at the Welsh National Stadium in Cardiff. That would be your model. That's the way to do it, because they actually catch rainwater, use that, funnel it underground, and they use all of that to basically take care of the field. And that one is a weave/grass field as well. It is also under a domed roof, and they've got artificial lighting to help it grow. It has worked out very well for them.
The new technologies that they've made in sports fields is incredible to see. I haven't heard anything regarding BC Place Stadium yet and what that will look like. We're about a year and a half out right now from this event taking place, so I'm sure there will be more news as we get closer to. BC Place Stadium is, for the age of it, has held up very well as a sports facility. It's a great stadium to watch an event. They did have some major renovations for the 2010 Winter Olympics as well. It was kind of home base for the Vancouver Olympics, and I would expect it to be nothing but world class when the World Cup comes rolling through in 2026.
And of course, the impact of that will be manyfold. Not only will it help infrastructure in those two cities, but it will impact the economies of those cities. And it's going to displace the Canadian Football League for about 6 weeks in that summer. They have to make allowances for where the Argonauts are going to play and where the Lions are going to play while this is all going on.
Well, one good thing that we've seen over the last couple of years is some touchdown Atlantic and touchdown Pacific games. It would not be surprising to see the Lions return to Vancouver Island and maybe play a game or two in Victoria. It might be the return of touchdown Atlantic somewhere out east. The Argonauts traditionally have been a part of that touchdown game as well. So it might not be terribly disruptive, but it is a big chunk of time in there that is right in the middle of the CFL season. There's going to be some extended road trips perhaps and some alternate locations.
You could also build in buys where maybe the Argonauts and the Lions are off at the beginning and at the end. They play 4 or 5 games in between. One of those could be a touchdown Atlantic. The other could be a touchdown Pacific. So you get at least a home date in that mix. And the rest of the dates are road dates. And that was probably something that I'm sure that the CFL is already thinking about, because I know this is coming and they're trying to make allowances for it.
One of the least disruptive things with the way that the schedule works now is they could host each other in a touchdown Atlantic and touchdown Pacific game as well. So it's those two teams that are doing battle in both ends of the country on these alternate location games. You mix in the buys and then a couple games on the road in other cities, and there you go. There are a lot of factors that go into a CFL schedule, and you have to look at the other 7 cities and teams involved in as well. But it is certainly something that I believe can be managed without too much disruption to the CFL season.
Well, Trevor Hardy is the person ultimately charged with figuring this all out. He's done a masterful job over the last several years, going from a balanced to an unbalanced schedule and then back to the more or less balanced schedule that the CFL has adopted again. The work that has to be done, it's not only you have to have venue sites, but then you got to consider travel and all these other things. And because during the World Cup, you can imagine that hotels are going to be at a premium. Most likely then you don't want to be probably trying to book a trip to watch a football game if the other form of football is being played there.
Hey, this is Reed from the Markcast. You're listening to Third Down Gamble.
Jason Hogan is the new offensive coordinator of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and most likely, I would think a lot of you listening to this podcast don't really know who he is. He's kind of quietly moved through the ranks of the Canadian Football League, and he is a type of guy that has worked hard to get where he's at. He's taken every job available to him to make that advancement, learn some more skill sets. Now he's got the reins in Winnipeg. And what has he done in the previous couple of years that he was there? Well, he was running backs coach, and who is the MOP?
That would be Brady Oliveira. And if you ever hear Brady speak when people are asking him questions about the success he's had on the field, he has often been very quick to mention Jason Hogan, the running backs coach, and what he has done for Brady's development. They seem to have a very strong working relationship, and now Hogan is moving into that offensive coordinator position. Friend of the show, Derek Taylor, the voice of the Bombers, has recently had an interview with Jason Hogan as a little bit of an introduction to the Winnipeg fans as to who he is. As you mentioned, he's been with the Bombers since 2022, but in that background role as the running backs coach, now he's getting the reins of the offense. And he's a guy that has a lot of Canadian roots. He played football for the Laval Rouge Or. He's worked his way through the system with some coaching with the Montreal Carabins, 2 years in quality control with the Montreal Alouettes before joining the Montreal Carabins, and now is back in the CFL with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. He seems to be excited. People that are in favor of an influx of new talent into the CFL in these roles, he's one of those young guys coming into a very prominent position.
The one thing that I liked about the way he got to where he is when he was with the Alouettes. He started as an offensive quality control coach, and then he also added some time with defensive assistant receivers coach, which basically means he had his fingers on all aspects of what the offense was doing. And when you're a quality control coach, you're essentially looking at what the team that you're coming up against, what they're throwing at you on defense, and then giving the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach some pointers as to watch for this, watch for that. And that's what your job is. You're there to sort of data mine what's going on the other side of the field.
Exactly. And he was asked what has changed for him this offseason. He's getting busy with all aspects of the offense. And he said the biggest difference right now is that he has been in contact with head coach Mike O'Shea a lot more frequently than he was in that running backs coach role. Often those lower tiered coaches don't spend a lot of one-on-one time with the head coach in the offseason, but he's excited to be involved right now. He's got that working relationship, and if you look at the Bombers in those coordinator positions, they have promoted from within. Jordan Younger, Mike Miller, and now Hogan. Those are three guys that they've developed through their coaching ranks into those coordinator roles.
His ideas on offense, what he was quoted as saying with Derek Taylor on 680 CJOB, is it's not hard for me to define the offense. I just want to keep it simple. I want the guys to play fast and not think too much. And that's kind of what I think he saw from his predecessor that wound up as the head coach in BC. He's looking at this situation and saying, look, we've got something that's working here. They know what they're doing. Do I want to junk it up? Not necessarily. Maybe the odd time.
Well, and when you've got a running back who has been the West nominee for MOP and the reigning MOP, so the last two seasons have been very strong for Brady Oliveira in that offense. It's not something that you're going to want to throw away. You've got Zach Collaros again back for at least one more season as quarterback. He's comfortable in the system. You've got some new look receivers coming in. There's still Nick Dembski. There's still some guys that he knows. There's some guys that came in last season, Kevin Sklercius, to name one that he's worked with for at least a season now. Now you're building in Dylan Mitchell. Now you're adding in Jareth Stearns. See where they fit into the mix. But he has to be pretty comfortable with the pieces that are already there.
One of the things that he does have to concern himself with is the fact that the Winnipeg offensive output is declining. In 2023, it was first in league-wide points per game. In 2024, not so anymore. And that slow start in 2024 really showed that Winnipeg could be caught by other clubs. Now, they did manage to put it together. They did manage to make it to the playoffs and win their way to the Grey Cup, but Toronto stood in their way once again. But for him, that is an issue. And when you're losing Kenny Lawler to Hamilton, that's a big weapon on offense that you don't have to take the lid off. And for him he's probably going to rely on Oliveira a lot at the beginning of the season. They didn't have that luxury in 2024. In 2025, I imagine that's where they're going to start and wait to see if one of those receivers, let's say if Ontario Wilson comes back, maybe he could fill that role.
I believe they're very high on Dylan Mitchell coming in from the Edmonton Elks as well. He's a big physical receiver that has shown some flashes, and this is a big opportunity for him to come into Winnipeg now. Kenny Lawler's a tough one to replace. You have to think that they have eyes on Dylan Mitchell taking up a big chunk of those yards and those targets that Kenny Lawler was previously getting. Dalton Schoen also will be coming back, missing the entire season due to injury in 2024. We can see the numbers he puts up when healthy as well. So that should be a pretty good compliment. I would be very comfortable if I was Jason Hogan right now with the weapons I have. Yes, there's some new people to find how they're going to fit into the system. Offensive line is almost all returning from last year as well. So you've got that camaraderie, that cohesive unit there. It's a great opportunity for him to take the reins now. Buck Pierce got a lot of negative reaction from the fans with the way that the 2024 Grey Cup played out. Now you can throw all that away. You've got a new guy in there with a lot of the same pieces, and we'll see how they gel.
Buck Pierce, to be fair to him, he didn't expect that his starting quarterback would injure his hand. Now, granted, the tide had started to turn long before Collaros got that helmet to his hand that split his fingers open. If that doesn't happen, does it change the outcome of the game? Probably not. Still, I wouldn't put this on Buck Pierce. It's not on to him all the time. There are times when you say, okay, maybe a different play call would have netted something different. Fine, but who among us has that expertise?
Often when there's disappointment, you need to find blame. And I would say it's more the fans than anybody else. I don't believe anybody on that coaching staff with Winnipeg is pointing fingers directly at Buck Pierce, saying that it was his play calling that cost them the Grey Cup. There's a combination of things that come into play, and had Collaros not injured his hand, things may have turned out differently. It certainly would have been a closer game, I think, than the final score was. I don't know if there was enough to knock the Argonauts off the top in that game. Again, now we're moving on to 2025 with a fresh look on offense, some big pieces coming back healthy. One of those, as we mentioned, Zach Collaros, coming back from that finger injury to his throwing hand. It sounds like he's ready to go. He has not indicated that he's in the CFL for the long haul moving forward from here. Retirement is starting to creep into his mind a little bit. He's all in for 2025 and that Grey Cup game in Winnipeg.
That's the big carrot that he wants to see if he can get a piece of. If Winnipeg wasn't hosting, I wonder after that disappointment in 2024 and the injury, because he's still rehabbing that hand. That was a deep cut. That took a lot of work. He had expert care in Vancouver with the surgery and he had to do a little bit of follow-up care on it as well. So he is not 100% with that hand as of yet. Now he's got what I would say 70 days to get ready for training camp. He should be ready. At 36, he's getting to that point in his career where, do I want to decide when I leave or do I want the game to decide for me? And most guys, if they get the chance, want to choose their own time of leaving.
They do, and I would anticipate that this is the last year for Zach Collaros. Again, I'm not inside the room. I don't have any knowledge beyond what I observe and what I hear from interviews. I just don't know if he's got it in him to stay dedicated beyond 2025. Princess Auto Stadium hosting the Grey Cup game has to be a big motivator for him to come back. He does have a young family that I'm sure he wants to spend more time with. It's difficult for a lot of these American players to spend so much time away from their families when they're up here for the season. I think this might be the last run for him, but I still expect him to be performing at a very high level as we've seen since he put on the blue and gold.
Well, he had his best year in 2024 in terms of passing, in terms of number of yards, completions, etc., since he's been a Blue Bomber. But he has to find it sooner. They stumbled to a 2-6 start last year. I don't think you can do that twice and expect to be back. If you fall into that rut again, there's sometimes a little bit of, oh, well, we've been here before, we can get through this. That is a mask that I don't know if I like to wear.
I agree, and I think if we start looking at teams and who's made waves, it appears to me like the Edmonton Elks are going to take a big step forward this year. I think Saskatchewan, as good as they were last year, I think they've improved a little bit as well. Nathan Rourke being anointed the number one guy in BC and having a full training camp as the starter, I would expect them to be competitive as well. That's three teams that have a legitimate shot at knocking the Bombers off that number one spot this season. So you're right, a quick start for Winnipeg would be key in trying to hang on to the top spot in the West, but it's going to be a tough road for any of those four teams. I can't discount the Calgary Stampeders either, I should mention. There are 5 teams in the West. I'm just not as confident that the Stampeders are going to be a contender, but they do have a new quarterback there as well, so we'll see how things shake out for them.
Speaking of the Calgary Stampeders, they have sort of took a stance that, hey, we went into free agency with a plan. It doesn't work the way we always want it to. No team probably gets everything they want. I was curious to see what they thought they wanted and what they felt they needed, and did they get all of that? And I'm not sure that they're convinced they did. The Stampeders were playing hard to get either Eugene Lewis and or Kenny Lawler to join the team. Now, Lewis would have been a logical one. We even speculated he would liking the idea of going to Calgary just because he had that great career in Montreal with Vernon Adams Jr. Now he's back out east in Ottawa, and of course Lawler in Hamilton. They didn't get either. Now the Stamps are still signing free agents. So much think of free agency as that period when the communication window starts, and then the next 3 to 5 days afterwards, players are signing everywhere. But there are a lot of draft picks, a lot of guys that weren't drafted in the NFL in 2024 that are now moving up to Canada to take a chance up here. We've seen a lot of signings. The Rough Riders, the Argonauts, the Lions, the Red Blacks have all brought up guys that at least had a shake at the NFL training camp.
They have, and we also have to remember the 2025 draft is coming up in just over a month and a half, end of April. So any undrafted players that were eligible for the NFL draft, if they don't sign with an American club, can start looking north of the border for those opportunities as well. The big splash that Calgary made in the offseason was the trade to get Vernon Adams Jr. They've added Damon Webb, they've added Fraser Sopik, Miles Brown, Tevin Jones were kind of the bigger name free agents that they've brought in. They also believe that they've got the pieces there to compete. You add a few more of these signings. PJ Walker is their other quarterback coming in as well, a little bit unknown in the CFL, but certainly capable as that number 2 quarterback. There are a lot of positives there, but they have not shown a lot in 2023 and 2024. So they've got to prove that they are back as that team you expect to see in the playoffs every year.
The other coup that they got maybe in terms of helping that defensive line, which was basically gutted by the Stampeders, is getting Folarin Ormolade out of Toronto. Now, Ormolade played with the Stampeders before. He knows the system. So he is back, and he is a stud. And that it will start as an anchor point, but they've got to fill in those other positions. Are they satisfied with anybody that was there last year? Mike Rose isn't there anymore with James Vaughters. He's now in Winnipeg. This all adds up to dissatisfaction. And when you're turning over a defense so much, their linebacking core is going to look almost brand new. Their corners, they've got, with one gone and one suspended, what else do you do? You've got to do something about that as well. It seems like whether by chance or by happenstance, the Stampeders are going to have to make more changes.
They are. Ormolade is certainly a big addition to come back to Calgary. And Miles Brown that they've signed on the defensive line from Saskatchewan is the other piece on the defensive line that they believe is going to come in and have an impact. Defensive backs, those corners are question marks right now.
Lots of players make a living by not making an NFL camp and coming up here and finding a full career. Dominic Rhymes and Vernon Adams Jr. together again. Remember what they did in BC when they had the opportunity. They can put up some big numbers together. That's going to help. They've got Jalen Philpott, should be healthy this year. Can that receiving core do something? They certainly will be much more of a gunslinging approach given Vernon Adams and exactly how he loves to play the game.
They still have veteran Reggie Bagleton on that receiving core as well. So those are some big weapons that Vernon Adams has to throw to. And I expect some big offensive numbers from Vernon Adams this year. We'll have to keep an eye on that touchdown to interception ratio and see where that plays out. If Dominic Rhymes could get back to the chemistry that he had in BC with Vernon Adams, I think that was going to be an addition. He's not a Kenny Lawler. He's not a Eugene Lewis, but he is a very capable and big play receiver, and I would expect to see him well over 1,000 yards should he remain healthy this year, and a big part of trying to keep the Stampeders in the playoff picture.
Dakota Prukop has been picked up by the Stampeders to be their quarterbacks coach. Now, Prukop had a reasonable career in the CFL, but he typically was a third down specialist. The odd time he got to play and throw the ball, but rarely was that availed to him. And now that he's going to be a coach, usually a guy that hasn't had the stellar career, the top of the line career, they're more adept at coaching players that are trying to get there than the guys that were on top and can't understand why you can't do what they do.
That's why Wayne Gretzky was not a great NHL hockey coach, because nobody else could see the ice like he could. The situation with Dakota Prukop is he's spent a lot of time on CFL sidelines. Yes, he's had some action as well, but he's been the guy that the other quarterbacks come off the field and talk to after a series. He's got that experience already, and I believe he's going to be a great fit to add to that Stampeders coaching staff as the QB coach.
He is the type of guy, I think, that is stable. And one of the things that you need is, if you're Vernon Adams Jr. and you're frustrated, Prukop will be there to kind of level it all out for you and make sure that you're still grounded. And I think that that's what Dave Dickinson really wants out of him, is a guy that can deal with Vernon Adams Jr. with the highs and the lows to make sure that they get as much out of him all 60.
Third down.
Montreal Alouettes and McCleod Bethel-Thompson. Interesting little marriage there. Thompson, of course, came via trade, but he's also the highest paid backup in the Canadian Football League, making $185,000 in hard money this season. That's some almost starting money there.
It is, but you have to look at their number one guy, Davis Alexander, isn't making the same range as the Trevor Harris and Zach Collaros and Bo Levi Mitchells of the CFL. So they do have some cap space that they can invest in a solid number two guy that they believe in. This is Davis Alexander's opportunity to cement himself as the number one guy, but you have to feel good about having somebody of McCleod Bethel-Thompson's pedigree in that backup role. Should he struggle, you have to imagine that the Alouettes have no qualms about going to their backup when you've got somebody like MBT.
Well, Thompson, of course, had an interesting go in Edmonton in 2024. Big money. Chris Jones was willing to pay him to get there, but it didn't work out. And it wasn't necessarily McCleod Bethel-Thompson's fault. You look at the games that they lost early, penalties, something would go wrong that just tripped up the Elks time and time again. And I think back to that game they lost to Ottawa with a kickoff going out of bounds. The Red Blacks get the ball up further on the field, and Drew Brown goes bing to Pimpleton, and suddenly the Red Blacks kick a field goal with less than 8 seconds. They've won the game.
I understand completely why it was time for a fresh start for McCleod Bethel-Thompson. He had put up solid offensive numbers as the Elks struggled out of the gate last year. But this is a fresh start for him. He's working with Jason Moss and Danny Machocha and a rejuvenated Montreal Alouettes team that has really built themselves into a solid contender 2023, 2024, and believe that they can be at the top of the heap in the East once again. I'm expecting to see a fair bit of playing time from Bethel-Thompson. I don't imagine that Davis Alexander is going to be on the field for 100% of the offensive snaps this year. And he's going to have an opportunity to increase his pay with about $72,000 in bonuses sitting out there for what he does on the field.
Do you think that Alexander is going to stumble, or is it just going to be by design that they want Thompson in there to do some packages with that offense?
I would expect a little bit of a step backwards from Alexander from time to time. I do think he's going to stay as that number one guy, but you look at the Hamilton Tiger Cats last year, they benched Bo Levi Mitchell, and he came back strong after the benching. He's a future Hall of Fame quarterback in this league, and that team was disappointed enough that they pulled him with the numbers that he was putting up early in the season. So for a young guy that doesn't have a lot of starts under his belt yet, I think Alexander will be successful, but if he stumbles along the way, you give Bethel-Thompson a look here and there, maybe a start or two if it's better served to have Alexander on the sideline watching the game as opposed to being in the heat of the battle.
I just want to circle back to Bo Levi Mitchell. I know that he got benched, and an injury brought him right back into the starting position. I don't know if you could put everything on that beginning of the season and the way the Ticats struggled on him. Part of the package that you get with Bo Levi Mitchell is that he'll understand and interpret and know that offense implicitly. And if his receivers aren't, he's still going to put the ball there. If the receiver isn't there, we know what could happen. That was part of what Scott Milanovich was kind of upset about, was that he wasn't interpreting what the receivers were doing. He was just following the playbook strictly. You got to have some ad-lib in that arsenal. What I will point out, though, is that Bo Levi Mitchell has put a lot of receivers into the NFL with the stats they get with him. Davis Alexander, it's going to be different because Reggie White, of course, has gone to Winnipeg, so he's losing a little bit, but he should have more time with the guys that are there from last year to build something. And I think in the long run, I don't see why Alexander's going to stumble. The game that he won in Regina, it was all on him. He did it, and I think he's got the upside they want.
A lot of things can happen, and you need to find that chemistry. And you talk about Bo Levi Mitchell. It wasn't his fault that he kept hitting Tim White in the hands and the ball was falling to the turf last season. Much like when Dane Evans was the number one quarterback in Hamilton, how many balls did he bounce through receivers' hands that ended up on the stat sheet as an interception to him at no fault of his own? Sometimes you just need that other look. And that's where I think McCleod Bethel-Thompson fits in Montreal. Is not necessarily that they don't have faith in Davis Alexander, but it might be better to just have that other look every once in a while with a proven guy that can go out there and turn things around if there is a little bit of a setback.
Kind of goes back to a point that I brought up, I can't remember which show it was, but when I was asking about backups, and I said, if you're going to sign a backup, you may as well be signing a starter, because if something happens to the one who's supposed to be starting, this guy is going to take over your team. I like the fact that the Alouettes put some more money towards Bethel-Thompson, make him feel good about being there. Same with Fajardo in Edmonton. You've got the same thing with Mayer in Saskatchewan. But when the chips fall down and the starter goes down for whatever reason, these are the guys that are going to run that offense. And you don't want a guy that just came off the street and has never seen a football before.
Absolutely. And we go through the stats of how many quarterbacks start a game in the CFL season to season. And I believe over the last couple of years, we've been as high as 23 starting quarterbacks in a 9-team league. So having somebody capable of stepping in those emergency situations is key. And there are a couple of teams with some holes. Most notably, I think the Winnipeg Blue Bombers with their quarterback situation. They don't really have somebody proven as the number 2 guy if Zach Calera struggles. They have a few under contract, Shea Patterson, Jake Dolagala, Chris Strevler. None of them in the opportunities they've had have really grabbed the bull by the horns and proven to be the number 1 guy. If you look at the rest of the teams out west, you mentioned Jake Mayer, PJ Walker, Cody Fajardo, Jeremiah Mazzoli. Those are the number 2 guys in the other teams in the West, and I would say all of those have a leg up on Winnipeg.
In an 81-game schedule, when you have 20 or more different quarterbacks starting, that's 1 in every 4 games, you're seeing a new face. That's a lot, and that's a lot of attrition. You better have a solid backup.
Third Down Gamble uses the expert resources of the Canadian Football League and 3 Down Nation. For up-to-date, insightful statistics and analysis, please visit cfl.ca and 3downnation.com. The CFL on CBC theme music is used with written permission from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation.
Thank you for listening to our show. Third Down Gamble is hosted on Podbean. Follow us on Twitter, where our handle is @ThirdDownGamble. Join us again next time. The Third Down Gamble Podcast. Audio worth watching.